Hi everyone, I'm Matt. I'm a Skyborne integrated ATPL student. I'm currently approaching the end of my course, and today I'll be interviewing Skyborne CEO Lee Woodward to ask for a Skyborne video series. Lee, thanks for joining me.
Hi Matt, how you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you coping?
Yeah, good. As good as you can be, obviously, in the current situation. But like we're doing now, Zoom and Skype, and seem to be just as busy, to be honest. But yeah, I'm doing very well, thank you.
So the first question I'd like to ask Lee is start by asking you to summarise the changes that Skyborne has had with regards to training because of the COVID-19 and the lockdown.
Obviously, significant changes. So when we were first notified of the lockdown, probably the most immediate effect, and I hope you'll appreciate my discretion with this, is that we were just about to announce the launch of our first UK-based cadet program. So we've signed an agreement with a UK-based airline, and it was meant to be announced at the Dublin PCL. And just 3 days before that event, we mutually agreed to hold fire because we didn't know at that point what the ramifications of COVID-19 might be. And here we are. We're also very close to announcing an agreement with a second UK airline. Again, we were unable to do that. But I think both of those announcements will be made in the fullness of time. So it's not an irreversible situation. Beyond that, operationally, we had to stop flying training entirely in the United States. So through our Westwind facility, our partner facility in Westwind, we had to stop the training for all of the Indigo students. And then clearly in the UK, we had to stop all training in the UK. However, in the UK, we were able, with the CAA's agreement, to launch the remote learning platform, which we're doing still. However, we were not able to do any flight training, and we've just found out literally in the last 24 hours that that is set to change. So we will commence flight training hopefully a week on Monday. Probably the most significant piece though is the closure of our Spanish operation. Spain, unfortunately, there was too much uncertainty about the future of flight training in Spain. And there was even more uncertainty about the availability of accommodation. And so we took the very difficult decision, but we had to make the decision to move all of the training back to the UK. So we won't have a Spanish base going forward. Personally, I think this is a strong move. I think that, as you've experienced, Matt, you can see the UK facility. It's a top-notch facility. We've got great expertise in the UK, and I think we deliver a better product when it's actually entirely controlled in one environment. And also, finally, the UK Accommodation Centre comes on stream in June. So all round, I think the user experience for the students, for the trainees, will be much better. But that's really an overview of how significant COVID-19 has been to Skyborne.
And do you think with changing the base to the UK that obviously one of the benefits we had out in Spain is the how clear the airspace is in terms of the early stages of training? Do you see that changing dramatically in terms of how you build up to going solo?
There will be some changes. I don't think they'll be as dramatic as one may think. So let me put that into some context. Both Ian and I have a huge amount of experience of training and placing cadet pilots. As you know, between us, we've probably trained somewhere in the region around 7,000 pilots in our time. Now, Ian's probably had more experience in training in what I would call classic fair weather bases, Florida and Phoenix. And I've had a little bit more experience in perhaps training more UK-based and in New Zealand. CTC, my previous company, the base in New Zealand was huge, well over 300 pilots a year going through that, and largely it ran on rails. And one of the reasons we chose New Zealand was because, firstly, it was an English-speaking country, so from an RT point of view, it was good. It had a reasonable amount of terrain, so there was challenges for the pilot, and it wasn't just 365 days a year sunshine. It had a weather pattern very similar to Northern Europe. And in my experience, we had very little disruption. It happened. Occasionally we'd get fogged out for 10, 12 days, it being the worst situation. But generally a 67-week course, which is very similar to what we do in Skyborne, ran to 67 weeks. So the short answer really to your question is I'm not expecting too much change to the footprint, but we are building fat into the system at no cost to the training.
Okay. I mean, one of the things I've actually noticed since I came back to the UK in February is actually I've been pleasantly surprised that the weather has never caused me a delayed flight or cancellation. But obviously, maybe in December, January, it could be slightly worse. Do you have plans that you can in place for that scenario? Obviously, the UK weather is not as good as it would be in Spain, but have you got plans to mitigate the effects and causes of the weather?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So when we chose Gloucester as a base, as was Staverton Airport, we were able to access the weather patterns over the last 5 to 7 years. So one of the things that Ian and I did in the early days was analyse how many flying days there were in the context of ab initio flight training. And actually the weather patterns were very good. What Skyborne has really to its great advantage is the huge hangar. So we can actually hangar all 10 of our training aircraft overnight, and particularly in frosty conditions. So sometimes what mostly hampers an operation is the cold weather frost situations and de-icing. We won't have to do that during the winter unless it's just some kind of transient situation. But generally to have a hangar of the size that we have, 16,000 square feet, that can accommodate all 10 training aeroplanes is a huge advantage. So more likely the issues will be low visibility and strong winds, and low cloud. And that really is only there for affect the very early stages of ab initio training. So, there's some of the mitigations that we can put in place. Also, we're not afraid to go to other airfields where the weather pattern is more suited to circuit work. And we're already striking up some relationships with other UK airfields in the vicinity of Gloucester. So again, on balance, I don't think it's going to affect the operation too much unless we're particularly unlucky.
Okay. So one of the things that, for me, certainly in my stage of training, coming towards the end and the uncertainty going forward with relation to jobs, one of the real positive things that Skyborne announced is the Skyborne Skills Continuation Training Program. Can you just explain a little bit more about that and exactly what it entails and what Skyborne are offering?
Absolutely. If you just go back one step then, what is Skyborne all about? Skyborne is all about giving the best user experience to the trainee possible, giving the best training that we can, but ultimately airline placement. That's really what this is all about, is getting our cadets, our graduates into airline placement. And you and I have spent a lot of time discussing this over the last sort of 6-7 months. So now we have a challenge because obviously airlines right across the board, British Airways have announced job cuts, so too has Virgin, EasyJet at the moment. Hasn't mentioned too much to my knowledge in terms of numbers, but of course their operation has entirely stopped. And then Ryanair, we see, will get going in July. So yeah, we'll have some challenges on our hands, particularly with airlines that are laying off pilots. I mean, I've had conversations with all of those airlines I've just mentioned, and we don't want to come across as needy or adding more burden to their own internal problems, but placement of our cadets remains paramount. So skills continuation then, if there is some kind of gap or hold on placement, then we want to overcome any issues that may come about with de-skilling over that period. So our view is, on a continuous basis, if anything should change at short notice, we'll call you in and we'll get you back up to speed, perhaps with interview preparation for the airlines or any kind of skills assessment. We'll do that at the drop of a hat. However, as a minimum, then on a quarterly basis, you'll be invited to come in to Skyborne, then to come into the DA42 simulator for some formal instruction. It's not just free play, and then we'll maintain your skill level. And if after a year, if we've still not placed you with an airline at that stage, then we will revalidate your instrument rating. So it's that combination of always on tap access to us in the event that something should change at short notice, and then we'll commit to get you back up to speed very, very quickly. On a quarterly basis, if something acutely doesn't happen, we will bring you in and give you formal training in the FMPT2, the A42 sim, and then at the end of the year, we'll revalidate your IR. And of course, that revalidation will last for a further year. So our commitment to you all is complete. Yeah, we will constantly be working with you to get you placed, and that's what it's all about.
Okay. And I mean, obviously, with your experience in terms of airline placement, airline training, which would you say is the most key part of that in terms of the skills? I mean, you've said obviously going in and doing the training in the 42. What is your or advice, or what of your knowledge do you understand is the most important thing to keep current and active and keep with your skills?
With you, I mean, the first thing is it's a two-way street. Okay, so our job is to maintain the connections and the dialogue with the airlines, and always keep our finger on the pulse at all times with all of the airlines that you could be eligible for. Right, that's the first statement. The second statement is to keep in contact with you, to keep you motivated, because during a period of furlough like that, it can sort of dampen your enthusiasm, not you personally, but one's enthusiasm. And our job is to not let that happen. So communication is critical. In terms of your commitment, your personal thing, I think keeping abreast of the market as well, following any leads that we may give you. So if we sense that something is happening with an airline and we're looking to get you geared up for that airline, if we start to ask you to read up on that airline, do some research, then of course we would expect you to do so. And certainly coming in for the recency training, committing to doing that is really important. In my previous life, I've done something similar, and on the very, very odd occasion, you might find someone who just says, I can't do that, I can't make it. And then over time, their enthusiasm wanes and their skills wane. It's extremely rare, and I wouldn't expect that from any of you guys, knowing you as well as I do. So keeping on top of your skills, maintaining your enthusiasm, keeping abreast with what's happening in the market, and following any leads or instructions that we give you that are specific to an airline.
And I mean, obviously, yes, going on for your experience, obviously you've been in the industry for 30 years. I mean, how does this current crisis compare to what you've seen in the past, and how do you think it will affect the aviation industry going forward?
It's a really, really good question, and you hear analysts discussing this every day virtually. I think the effect will be deep until a vaccine is found, personally. So these are my personal views. I think consumer confidence in international airline travel will suffer until a vaccine is found. But once a vaccine is found, I still think the jury's out a little on whether or not people's travel habits will change long term because of differences in working practice. I had that discussion last night with a friend of mine from the city. And our collective view, or our joint view, is that long term it won't change. Long term it will be back to business as usual. So I think, in summary, I think the airlines have got to navigate through this time of a drop-off in demand and some of the challenges they face right now to get passengers back on the aircraft with social distancing. But once a vaccine is found, what I've seen previously is coming out of a low point. So the Gulf War in 1990 is one that I can remember acutely. And then the 9/11 terror attacks in September 2001. And then finally, after that, the global financial crisis. There are three really distinct periods which are similar to this. And in 1990, there were a lot of initiatives that airlines did to stimulate travel. in 2001 and into the early part of 2002, I was flying in British Airways at the time. I remember British Airways had one day where every ticket on their entire network, regardless of class of travel, was free. So whether you bought a ticket in economy or first class or club, it was free. And I think it was Sir Rod Eddington who did that. And it's those kinds of moves that I think the airlines are going to have to make to really stimulate things again. Global financial crisis, 2007 and 8, we saw a huge cessation in recruitment of cadet pilots at that time in my previous company, CTC. However, CTC at that time then launched a contract pilot division called FlexiCrew. And we were able to get all of the cadet pilots at that time, around 200, 225, all of them placed into airlines, albeit they were not employed by the airline directly. Initially, they were employed by CTC, but all of them were out there flying. And I think those kind of innovations we've seen before, and something similar, a combination thereof, is what's going to be required here. But my personal view, I'll come back to it, is around a vaccine and making sure that when people do fly, it's secure, it's safe.
Okay, and so what would be your, obviously for me and in my stage of my training, I'm coming towards the end. Before this crisis started, I had my CPL coming up in the coming weeks. So I haven't got long to go. I mean, what's the best advice you could give me going forward in terms of my training and going forward in the future for airline placement?
Okay, well, again, just really the things I mentioned earlier on about staying motivated, staying engaged with us, keeping in contact, following any leads that we give you, and then obviously coming in for the refresher training. But beyond that, things you might want to consider, and obviously we're putting this out to all of our own cadets, is maybe even coming into the organisation as an instructor for a period. I guess there'll be personal circumstances between you all. Some of you may be able to go back to jobs and careers you had previously, but be able to continue with all of the measures we've already described in the skills continuation training policy. But some of you may consider working as instructors for us. And I think there's also possibilities outside of the UK still with Skyborne on the instructional side. So yeah, we have the sponsored instructor route, and that might appeal to one or two of you. Some of you may even choose a combination of those things, where perhaps you are ground school instructors and also have another job. But it is about staying positive, being adaptable. And I think something I didn't mention earlier on is the more flexible you are and the more open-minded you are about the airline opportunities, I think the better. For me, it's always about that first job. It's about getting that first type rating, that first airline placement, and not being too concerned about where the base may be. We've had, again, you and I have had this discussion before. The more flexible you are, the more adaptable you are, I think the sooner you'll get placed.
Okay. Can you just expand a little bit on the instructor sponsorship scheme that Skyborne offer?
Yes, so we launched some time ago a sponsored instructor scheme. So pilots who come to us with a certain level of baseline qualification, which obviously we would make sure that our own cadets would meet, can come to us, and we will sponsor them then through the various escalating instructor qualifications that you require. So in other words, going right from the basics on a single engine through to instrument training on a DA42. So the idea is that we sponsor all of that training and pay for all of those qualifications and invest in your training, and in addition pay you salary in return for a commitment to Skyborne for a period of time, so potentially 2 years. And then finally we would offer then obviously coaching and mentoring into an airline placement as and when. Now that part is a given for you guys anyway, but the sponsored instructor program was meant for people who hadn't been through the cadet program and were coming to us purely through the instructor route. So we could blend it for you guys as well.
Okay. So
Okay.
thanks, Lee. Thanks for answering all my questions. I'm sure everyone, for me personally, it's been great to hear your answers, and I'm sure for everyone at home and for anybody who's got any further questions, if you'd like to email fly@skyborne.com.